what if you set too aggressive a goal and didn't meet it? Would you have perceived failure? Like, where does goal setting play into this for you?
Let me back up and actually tell you where this quest came from in the first place. This is a story that's not actually in the book. The last conversation I had with Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, I had called him up because they translated a bunch of his stuff out of Italian, a bunch of old interviews and a bunch of stuff was finally in English, and I saw it for the first time. He was always sort of an avid outdoorsman, known to did research on rock climbers and mountaineers and lived in Montana, liked to hike, all that stuff. But I'm reading all these early materials and I'm like, this guy was a serious climber. I'm like, wow, okay. So I called him up and I was like, Mike, I know you tell this story in your TED Talk about how you saw flow in a concentration camp and your early research was on artists. But I'm reading all your stuff and I'm like, I think you had my experience. I think you got into flow as an action sport athlete and you needed to explain it, and action sports was so weird, especially back when you started. I mean, it was weird for me doing this work in the 90s and the 2000s. He was doing it in the 60s and 70s, right? You'd no chance to talk. And I was like, so that's what this is really about, right? You were just a serious mountaineer, flow junkie, and blah, blah. And there's this long pause. I lay all this out and a minute goes by, 2 minutes, and I'm like, oh shit, I've just pissed off the godfather of flow psychology. And whoa. And after a very long pause, he says, well, Steven, you got to be careful. And I'm now I'm wondering, did the stroke affect his brain? Has he lost the bread? And I was like, Mike, what do I have to be careful about? He's like, well, you get to my age and you do something for flow your whole life, and then you get to my age and forget about climbing mountains. You can't even get out of bed. Wow. You gotta have a backup plan. You gotta be careful. And it was literally the last conversation I had with him, and I had been studying sort of peak performance aging and regenerative medicine, all these things for a very long time, but something like this was like one flow junkie to another saying, have a backup plan. And skiing was always what I did for flow. It was my primary flow experience. And the thing about park skiing was this. I had this idea. So you can use risk as a flow trigger, but it gets really, really, really dangerous as you get older, right? Mm-hmm. You can use novelty as a flow, other things as a flow trigger, but creativity works the best. And so I knew if I could creatively interpret the terrain features on the mountain, which is essentially what park skiing is, right? If I sort of made my way from zero to intermediate in park skiing, I might have a million more entrances into flow in my favorite activity in the world that were a lot safer. And even though it was going to be dangerous to get there, once I got there, suddenly the menu was much wider. And while there's more to the backup plan that I ended up developing, that was at the core of it. So when I set the list of goals, yeah, I was really conscious of what you were saying, that if I put a time limit and said, we're going to do this in a season or whatever, I could screw myself because I didn't think there was any way I was going to get there, right? So what I said to myself is, if it takes 5 years, that's fine. I'll be 60 years old and I'll have a million more entrances into flow in my later years, and that'll be cool and that'll be totally worth it. And that was where I started. And I set very specific goals along the way that were not related to outcome. So that was the big outcome goal. And then I set daily process goals. I wanted to show up and ski 12 laps if I was tired, 16 laps if I felt normal, and 20 laps if I felt great, and things like that. So I was very specific with how I did it, so that the goals, for the most part, all pointed in the same direction and weren't conflicting and didn't screw me up that way, because too much stress would have ended up creating norepinephrine, blocking flow.